Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really substantial piece of policy.
Yeah, this one's got a lot packed into it. Executive Order 14269.
Exactly. Restoring America's Maritime Dominance.
Yeah.
Published back in April 2025. And, well, it reads less like policy and more like a battle plan.
It really does. It frames the situation as, frankly, a crisis born from decades of government neglect.
Neglect that has just hammered U.S. commercial shipbuilding capacity. And the workforce, too, critically.
Absolutely hammered it. We've just lost that critical mass, that ability to build at scale.
And the numbers the EO cites are, well, they're pretty stark, aren't they?
They are, yeah.
Yep.
It points out the U.S. builds less than 1% of commercial ships globally. Less than 1%.
Wow.
Meanwhile, you've got the PRC, China, producing roughly half the world's commercial ships.
Half. That gap is just enormous.
It's immense, and that's the core problem this whole order is trying to fix.
So the mission for us today, mirroring the EO's mission really, is to unpack this comprehensive plan. It's about rebuilding the maritime industrial base for security, yes, but also for the economy.
And the first big step, the overarching action, is creating this Maritime Action Plan, or MAP. They've got 210 days.
210 days, and it requires this massive coordination effort.
Oh, yeah. Defense, state, commerce, labor, transportation, the USTR. Pretty much every key agency is involved. It signals, that the status quo just isn't working anymore.
Okay, let's dig into it. Section 4 kicks things off, focusing on securing and making this industrial base resilient. And what jumped out at me immediately was the mention of the Defense Production Act Title III authorities.
That's a huge signal, isn't it? Using DPA Title III, that's not your standard operating procedure.
Not at all.
It basically treats this shipbuilding gap like a wartime footing kind of problem. It justifies using these really powerful investment tools normally reserved for, national emergencies.
And they're specific about where the investment needs to go.
Commercial and defense shipbuilding, the component supply chains, which are vital ship repair, transport, port infrastructure, the whole ecosystem.
But there's a catch, a requirement for accountability.
Right. Every recommendation has to show a clear return on investment, not just financially for the taxpayer, but also for national security. There have to be metrics.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the money. How are they going to fund all this? Because, shipyards need serious long-term capital.
Exactly. You can't build a carrier or a major commercial vessel on shaky year-to-year funding. So the DSHL-IO calls for proposing legislation for two main funding mechanisms.
Okay, first up is the Maritime Security Trust Fund in Section 9. Why a trust fund, specifically? What's the thinking there?
Well, a trust fund suggests long-term dedicated funding. Often these are funded outside the normal appropriations process, maybe from tariffs, fees, fines, something like that.
So it avoids the annual budget battles in Congress.
That's the idea, predictability. It tries to give the industry a stable financial horizon so they can make those huge multi-decade investments needed for shipyards and complex builds.
Right, that makes sense. Stability. And complementing that, Section 10 outlines a shipbuilding financial incentives program. What's that about?
This sounds more flexible. Think grants, loans, loan guarantees, all compliant with the Federal Credit Reform Act, importantly. It's designed to directly encourage private companies to invest in building ships, making components, and upgrading the shipyards themselves.
So public funds used to leverage private capital.
Precisely. And the financial vision isn't just about how to fund, but also where. Section 11 proposes these maritime prosperity zones.
Yeah, I saw that. Model on the Opportunity Zones concept from the 2017 Tax Act, right?
Exactly. But tailored for maritime industries. The goal is to spur investment, both domestic and from allies, in specific geographic areas, maybe offering regulatory relief too.
But what I found really interesting was the requirement to look beyond the usual coastal hubs. They specifically mentioned including river regions and the Great Lakes. Why the push inland?
That feels like a very deliberate strategic choice. Concentrating everything on the coasts makes you vulnerable, right? Think storms, security threats, congestion.
Okay, diversification.
Diversification, resilience. Maybe finding areas with lower costs for land and labor. It spreads the industrial base, builds new supply chains, makes the whole system less fragile. It's smart industrial policy with a geographic layer.
All right, so we have plans for funding and locating this revitalized industry. But what about the competition, particularly the PRC competition that, contributed to this problem in the first place? Section 2 gets into trade actions.
Yeah, this is where the EO gets pretty direct. It follows up on a Section 301 trade investigation and basically tells the U.S. Trade Representative, the USTR, to strongly consider imposing tariffs.
Specifically targeting PRC goods.
Yes, and the initial targets mentioned are very pointed, ship-to-shore cranes, whether they're manufactured, assembled, or just made with PRC components.
Cranes, that seems
Well,
oddly specific. Why focus on the cranes?
Well, think about it. Those massive cranes you see at ports, they load and unload almost everything. They're critical infrastructure.
Okay.
They're also increasingly automated, often networked, so controlling the source of those cranes isn't just about trade balance, it's potentially about supply chain security, port security, even cybersecurity. Are these cranes potential Trojan horses? That seems to be the underlying concern here.
Wow, okay. That puts a whole different spin on it. It's security disguised as trade policy.
It certainly looks that way. And then Section 6 tackles another related issue, loopholes, specifically avoiding the harbor maintenance fee, the HMS.
The issue where ships dock in Canada or Mexico and the cargo comes into the U.S. by truck or rail, bypassing the fee meant for U.S. port upkeep.
Exactly. It undercuts U.S. ports that rely on that fee. So how do you fix that? The EO proposes a pretty tough solution. It directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to require all foreign origin cargo arriving by vessel to clear U.S. customs at a U.S. port of entry.
Okay, force it through a U.S. port.
Or, if it does clear inland after coming through Canada or Mexico, it gets hit with all the applicable fees, including the HMF, plus an additional 10% service fee.
10%? Ouch. That sounds steep. Isn't that essentially a backdoor tariff that could raise costs for consumers on all sorts of goods?
It absolutely could raise costs, yeah. But that 10% is the stick. It's meant to make using that Canada-Mexico route financially painful, maybe even ruinous.
So level the playing field by making the alternative much more expensive.
That seems to be the logic. And they also recognize this needs international buy-in, so Section 7 directs the USTR to talk to allies within 90 days about these potential tariffs and border fee changes.
Right, coordinating actions. Okay, let's shift gears from hardware and fees to the people side of things. Section 13 deals with mariner training and education. You can't revitalize shipbuilding without the builders and the sailors, right?
Absolutely not. The workforce is arguably the linchpin. So first, they need a report just to figure out how many more credentialed mariners are actually needed to support all these new policies.
Just getting a handle on the scale of the need.
Exactly. Then, the plan looks at expanding the Merchant Marine Academies, sure, but also, and this is important for anyone in the industry, identifying and reforming credentialing requirements that are maybe unnecessary or overly burdensome.
Streamlining the red tape.
Hopefully. And a really smart piece is looking at how to make it easier for U.S. Navy personnel, active and reserve, to transfer their skills and get validated for the Merchant Marine. That's a huge pool of experienced talent right there.
Tapping into existing skills.
Yeah.
And they're also looking ahead, aren't they, at future tech?
Definitely. Section 13C talks about legislative proposals for national maritime scholarships, but not just for anything specifically to send U.S. experts overseas to learn cutting-edge stuff.
Like what?
Things like clean fuels, advanced nuclear energy for ships, human-machine teaming, additive manufacturing, 3D printing for ships, basically.
So it's not just about catching up. It's about leapfrogging to the next generation of maritime tech.
That seems to be the ambition, which ties into the next big area, making the government itself a better customer. Sections 15 and 16 tackle government efficiency, specifically in how it buys ships.
Because, let's be honest, government shipbuilding projects, Navy, Coast Guard, have a reputation for delays and cost overruns.
A well-earned reputation, unfortunately. It's often been a slow, overly customized bureaucratic process. So the EO mandates developing better acquisition strategies.
Oh.
One key thing is giving shipbuilders better market forecasting, letting them know what the government plans to buy years in advance so they can justify making investments.
Makes sense. Predictability again.
And reducing the layers of approval needed. But the really big shift is pushing towards using commercial acquisition practices and modular design.
Modular design, like building ships in sections.
Kind of, yeah. Standardizing components and sections that can be built independently and then assembled. It reduces complexity, allows for parallel work. Crucially, it helps prevent those constant design changes during construction that just wreak havoc on schedules and budgets.
So trying to make government shipbuilding operate more like an efficient, modern manufacturing process.
That's the goal. More predictability, less customization where it's not needed, faster delivery, lower cost. We'll see if they can pull it off.
Okay, moving toward the endgame strategy. Section 17 focuses on growing the actual U.S.-flagged fleet that operates internationally.
Right. These are the commercial ships that can also be called upon in a crisis. Think troop transport, supply logistics. They're national security assets.
So how do they plan to increase that fleet?
The ESO calls for a legislative proposal to basically enhance existing subsidy programs like the Maritime Security Program. The idea is to cover certain construction or modification costs, specifically to incentivize companies to build, flag, and operate these militarily useful ships under the U.S. flag while trading internationally.
Tying commercial operations directly to defense readiness.
Exactly. It's bridging that gap.
And looking even further ahead, Section 18 mandates a strategy for the Arctic waterways. That feels timely.
Very timely. With climate change opening up Arctic routes, there are new economic opportunities, but also significant new security challenges up there. The U.S. needs a clear strategy for ensuring security and leadership in that region.
Makes sense. And then there are a couple of final review requirements.
Yeah, Section 19 calls for a review on how to get more companies competing for government shipbuilding contracts, Army, Navy, Coast Guard again, trying to drive down costs and delays through competition.
More competition, better outcomes.
Theoretically. And Section 20 mandates a deregulation review, looking for rules that might be blocking the adoption of new emerging maritime technologies, clearing the path for innovation.
Okay, so stepping back.
Yeah.
What does this all mean for you, the listener? This isn't just one policy change. It's a really sweeping effort.
It's incredibly broad. You've got trade actions on cranes, new fees on cargo coming through Canada and Mexico, new funding mechanisms, these prosperity zones, education reforms, scholarships for nuclear propulsion tech, overhauling how the government buys ships. It touches almost everything.
It's a whole-of-government attempt to reverse decades of decline in a critical industry. A roadmap, really.
It is a roadmap. But the fundamental challenge, as the EO itself acknowledges, is immense. Going from less than 1% of global commercial shipbuilding back to anything resembling dominance. That's a monumental task.
The order clearly lays out the problems, it sets the goals, and it tasks all these agencies with figuring out how to get there, and quickly.
Within that 210-day deadline for the MADE action plan. Yeah, it's ambitious.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something for you to think about. The EO mentions the complexity and, frankly, the high cost of building ships in the U.S. compared to elsewhere. Given everything we've discussed, the tariffs, the push for deregulation, the new funding, these maritime prosperity zones, which single element do you think holds the most potential? Which one is most likely to actually overcome that cost disadvantage and help make U.S.-built vessels, as the order hopes, commercially competitive in international commerce?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Is it the protectionism, the investment boost, or the regulatory changes? Or does it need all of them working perfectly together?
Something to consider. That's all the time we have for this deep dive.